welcome to the Sugar and Spikes podcast, a podcast for entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and anyone ready to uplevel their career in their own damn way. I'm Des. I'm a life coach for women who get that having it all sometimes means having to balance the good and the bad, the sugar and the spikes, and all the in-between.
And I'm Tammy. I'm a therapist, and I'm all about helping as many people as possible to build awareness and make meaningful changes in their lives. I'm also dedicated to diversity and inclusion and increasing access to mental health care.
Between the two of us, we have 4 master's degrees and thousands of hours helping people develop balance, confidence, and clarity on their terms. So let's get started. Hi everyone, and welcome to the newest Sugar and Spikes podcast. I'm Des, and we have Tammy with us.
Hi, everyone.
And this week, well, just kind of getting into it, it feels a little different.
Kind of does, doesn't it?
I feel like on one hand, we're getting back into the swing of things, given the trip. And like, when I came back, we did one and it was fabulous.
It was.
Actually, I was listening to it in editing and it was actually really good.
It was good. We hadn't seen each other in a while. We were on our game.
Yeah. And now this time, I feel like in a couple months, weeks or something, I'm going to end up using this experience as even when you don't want to, you keep doing it type of like spiel. 'Cause I know like one of us has had some stuff going on and, you know, we've rescheduled a bit and everything, and that's been fine. And we didn't even have to do today's podcast. I mean, really, technically, we never have to do the podcast.
We choose to.
But it wasn't like we recorded or there was nothing coming out for where we are. But the thing is, and this ties into kind of one thing that we were talking about earlier, is we choose to do this for you guys and we choose to show up like as our authentic selves. I'm not going to say no matter what, but like given a lot of odd and awful circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to say, like, we don't always have to be in this perfect on space all the time, you know? I think part of our authenticity is, like, we're human beings and...
Yeah, and go through things and have experiences, which, honestly, like, I'm just going to pause and we're going with the flow, right?
Yeah, we're doing spontaneous today.
I don't think that's something either of us would have said a year ago.
I think that's probably true.
Because, so we just came up on our 1 year, like, anniversary of the business. I know that because my old Gmail expired.
Right. We're like, way to exactly mark time.
Yeah, and so, I was looking back at old posts and old lives, and there's still a few on my Facebook, actually, where, like, present day me is just like, oh, sweetie. And we were so concerned of like looking perfect and professional and all of these things, which we do. Like we bring that to anything and everything we do. And there's like this realness that comes up, and it has to come up if you're doing, and this is for all of you entrepreneurs that are like, I want to do a lifestyle blog, I want to be a coach, I want to do all of these kind of like generalized things. You can't do it and be perfect.
No. Perfection is like an unattainable goal.
And you can't do it with your fake perfection.
That's true.
This is me in the morning, and technically I'm not wearing any makeup, but the lighting is just right, so I'm gonna take the selfie and do hashtag no filter. No.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be real, right? You have to be authentic, and we've talked about that on the podcast before. I mean, that's been a journey for us that continues to...
As evidenced by, right?
Right? Like, it just continues, right? Like, everything's kind of a journey. You can get to different levels, and you can improve, and you can learn new things. And actually, that's kind of a perfect lead into something that I wanted to revisit from one of our previous podcasts.
Yeah.
And that was when we were talking about grief.
Mm-hmm.
And you said, well, when I experience a loss, I tend to take care of everyone, I think is what you said.
More or less, like, I never kind of officially said that, but I go into, like, a caretaking role and, like, a protector role.
Yeah.
And if you didn't listen to it, go back and listen to it. But really
It'll
quick,
make
like,
more sense.
Like, I become the comedian. Like, I
Yeah.
know the intensity of the situation, and I start accounting for everyone's response by making highly inappropriate jokes.
Yeah, and
Which, just so you know, that's what happens.
That's okay. To which my response was, oh, but you don't feel your feelings. You have to set aside time.
Mm-hmm.
And although I meant well, I don't think that was as informed as it could have been.
Okay.
And I had my eyes open recently because I went to a training where we talked about grief and loss.
Mm-hmm.
And in talking to, or not in me talking, but the speaker talking, I realized that, well, societally speaking, but me too, that I had some biases and some preconceived ideas about grieving.
Mm.
And I think it's pretty common. So that idea that you have to cry, that you have to feel your feelings in a specific way.
Right.
Right. And I didn't even realize that was happening. But when she was talking about grief, and she said there's all these manifestations of grief, right? Like exactly what you're talking about, and the things that you do are a manifestation of grief.
Really?
Yeah.
So I'm not like stupid weird?
Hook.
Nice.
And that we as a society tend to think that it happens in this very kind of typically feminine way.
Well, like how many does this tie into the stages of grief?
So the other thing she said that was really interesting is that there aren't really stages of grief.
Okay.
That we like the stage model because it helps us to know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And yet grieving happens kind of more like ups and downs, or it gets less intense with time, but then at other times, like anniversaries,
it pops back up.
Or like, let's say you lost someone really important in your life when you were 7.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you're having kids and you realize, oh, this person who was really important to me isn't going to be here to see my kids,
Mm-hmm.
that grief can hit you then in a different way than it hit you when you were 7.
Okay. That honestly makes me feel a little better, because there's something that like I don't talk about very often.
Mm-hmm.
But like I'll bring it up when it's pertinent.
Yeah.
And it feels like it is right now.
Okay.
Like I grew up with like the stages model and the idea of like eventually you'll get to like where you're done with it and everything. And the thing is like when important things come up in my life, or even if I just have like a really like notably good day or something, I will pick up my cell phone, because yes, I was like young/old enough to have a cell phone when this event happened, but I'll pick up my cell phone out of habit and I'll like want to call my grandmother.
Yeah.
And then be immediately like, oh, that's not a thing. Like,
Right.
I can't.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's a big thing. Like, it's not like it makes me cry, or like it doesn't pull me back from my day, but it's a moment that I have.
Yeah, you have feelings about it.
Almost 10 years later.
Sure.
So, like, actually, oh God, yeah, it's interesting we're talking about this right now. We're on like the 10-year anniversary of like her death.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, like I've moved on. Like I don't spend my days like crying or like adapting to things.
So it's not about moving on necessarily, because it's not like you ever get used to not having the person, or in my case, my dog.
Mm-hmm.
You learn to move forward, which I think is a different than moving on. Like moving on as in leaving the thing in the past, moving forward as in I'm continuing to live my life and this thing comes with me.
Okay.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's different, right?
Yeah.
And the other thing that she said that I thought was particularly meaningful to me was that she said, you know, grief is a reflection of love. And you don't stop loving someone just because they're not there.
Yeah.
So you don't stop loving them. So the grief never really goes away. It changes shape. It becomes less intense. It hits you in different ways. And yet it's still there. Your active grieving, that may have subsided. The intensity may have subsided. And you learn to walk forward without this person in your life or your dog, which I can kind of consider a person. So I mean him too. And so it's more about coping with the acknowledgement that you miss this person and that's okay. So it was a really meaningful presentation for me. And it was something that I wanted to revisit because I felt like I didn't do a good job of doing justice to your feelings in the way that you choose to grieve. And I wondered if other people listening to the episode may have taken that. It came from a sincere place.
Yeah.
And it was a little bit misguided. So I want to make sure that I corrected that and said that if that's your way to grieve, then that's your way.
I didn't feel that. Like, it's interesting because it's one of those times where it's both things because I didn't feel it. And it's nice to know that, like, the professionals out there are like, this is an actual thing that happens. Because I will say, like, I always felt like I had to be like, well, initially it's the shock that makes me this, like, asshole person. Which, like, guys, I can't stress how inappropriate my jokes are.
Okay.
But then padding it, and I feel like I did this on the episode, like padding it with, a few days later when no one was around, that was when I, like, quote unquote grieved. And the thing is like, it's the whole process, and writing it off or like chunking that initial response to like a trauma response, which is kind of how I've always like framed it up to other people. I feel like it's unnecessary. Like, this is how I deal with grief, and that's that.
Yeah, it's how you deal with loss, right? For me, kind of how I deal with loss is I just kind of get stiff upper lippy and, like try to come to terms with it. And yet I wouldn't say I'm a particularly big crier. That's just not who I am. And so I make sure that everyone's taken care of. I do the things that need to be done. And it doesn't mean that I'm not sad. It doesn't mean, because really what we're talking about is a feeling. Well, you can't see the feeling. You're seeing the behaviors associated with it, and you're making judgments, right? Like, oh, she's not sad because she's not crying.
Yeah.
Or she's not sad or she's not grieving because she's caretaking everyone. So really, it's jumping to conclusions where if you just check the facts, you don't really know what's going on with the person.
Can we talk about the fact that, like, so piggybacking off of what you said, let me think of how to phrase this right. Like, has anyone ever told you it's okay to cry?
Oh, yes.
And people have told me that in a lot of situations, and I've been like, I know that if I wanted to, I would, and right now, here are the things that are going on. Like, don't put your shit on someone else.
Yeah, so I think this idea, from my perspective, when you said that, it's okay to cry means I think you should be crying right now.
Yes, it's like handing someone a tissue in therapy.
Yeah.
Like, clean yourself up. Or it's the reverse of clean yourself up. It's the let yourself go because I know best.
Yeah, like...
And you should let yourself go.
Right, like, I'm giving you permission. And yet, it's so ingrained in the way we think about grief, right? So I would say it's meant well.
Yeah.
Right? Because we have this idea that we cry, we give it, I don't know, 3 months.
Yeah, sure.
At the outside, 3 months.
Yeah.
And then you should, quote unquote, I'm saying in big air quotes, I know you can't see me, move on.
Right.
So move forward makes more sense. And there's no time frame.
Yeah. It's really all about developing a new sort of normal.
Yeah.
And how that fits into society and culture and all of that stuff. And this is me thinking like diagnostically, like, but like, I don't know. It's just, it's this weird, like, fitting into something and then not having to fit into something.
Which is a lot of what we talk about, right?
Yeah.
So I really hope that talking about it today helps people to say, oh, this is my way of grieving and that's okay.
And piggybacking like more off of that, the idea that there is one way to grieve, because like, so I've gone to therapists like years after my grandmother died, and they've been like, well, you didn't really grieve. And it's like, well, what does that mean?
So I think that that's true. You can practice avoidance of your feelings. I have had clients who have done that in many different contexts, right? So like, let's take it in a totally different way.
Okay.
Let's say you end up with an illness that severely puts limitations on your body and what you can do. And before that, you were healthy and you used to engage in, maybe you like to run marathons or half marathons, or that was something you were really passionate about.
You're a runner.
You're a runner. And now you can't do that anymore. And definitely, if you can, not at the level that you used to.
Right.
So the idea of grieving that loss is to acknowledge, I don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
And that makes me feel fill in the blank. That makes me feel mad. That makes me feel like it's unfair.
Yeah.
That makes me feel sad. That makes me feel like I'm not myself anymore. Right? So to me, that's the idea of grieving things that you may have been avoiding.
Yeah.
Or you haven't acknowledged the feelings that go along with the loss. So I think that can be true, that sometimes people don't feel the feelings associated with losses of people and things that they love. And I think also 10 years later, you can cry because you miss your grandmother.
Yeah. And so the running piece brought up something that I think is also very important to note, is the idea of grief doesn't just stick with living things. Like it can be opportunities or I don't want to say lifestyles because that feels weird, but that's
identity.
Identity. Thank you. Something like that. Because so when I was seeing this one therapist, this was the same therapist that like challenged me on the, you didn't really grieve your grandmother, but then introduced me to the idea of like another life grieved. And helped me really navigate my feelings and emotions around not going to a grad school I wanted to go to, which was something that I didn't realize I was holding on to like in an unhealthy manner. But then they were like, the thing is like you had this life that you were going to live and all these things, and like you can grieve that. Like that person is dead. Like it's not going to happen. I mean, technically it could, but you know,
well, it's a loss.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a loss of like all of these other things. And it was interesting because I was just in Philly the other week because I was flying in and out of Philly. And the last time that I was in Philadelphia was when I was at the college I was on a fellowship. And at that point, it wasn't my intention to go back for grad school, but like that was when I fell in love with the city.
Right.
And then I got accepted to this school. And like, guys, I had a deposit on the moving truck. Like I was ready to go. And then things happened and I shifted. So being back in Philly almost 10 years later, like 7 years later, that was a whole other thing. And I just, at that point, after going through all the therapy and stuff, it was like grieving a life lived. Like, it's fine to feel sad, like when you land and touch down and like see the skyline, that's fine. And here's how to navigate like all the feelings and looking forward. And like, I was definitely instituting coping skills of if I'd gone, I wouldn't have these things and all of that stuff. So I think like the thing is like, if there are huge life decisions, yeah, this is what my tangent is leading up to. If there are huge life decisions, it's fine for it to stick with you years later.
Sure. Because one thing that you said is that, well, that I took from what you said, is that when you make big life decisions, there are gains and losses associated with that decision. Yeah. Your decision not to move to Philadelphia had gains that came as part of it and had losses that came as part of it.
Yeah.
So it's messy when we lose people close to us, when we have a negative life event, or even a positive life event. You can have a positive life event with some very negative consequences, right? So It's not as simple and not as black and white to say this was a great decision and I didn't experience any losses or negativity from it, or this was a terrible experience and I didn't have any gains from it.
Well, and I think the idea of, I kind of lost it, but the idea of making a choice and it having to essentially be like negative, I think, I think it can stay a bit more neutral than that in terms of like lifestyle and stuff, because I think like it's fine if you're getting ready to leave your corporate job with like a guaranteed salary and like you have the income to like stay fine.
Oh, I wouldn't consider that negative events. I mean,
but then it's like, sorry.
I mean like death losses, like negative events.
But I think like in terms of like life decisions.
Oh yeah.
Which like the Philly thing is what we're talking, like life decision, right? Like truthfully, I don't think there would have been, if 10-year me from now in Philly would have looked back, I don't think she would have said, like, she'd be like, this all worked out for good.
Sure.
You know? So I think, like, there's still scary things. Like, it doesn't have to be negative. It can be scary or uncertain.
Mm-hmm. So what you're really talking about is kind of a more neutral event, right? An event.
Yes.
Just a life event, any event.
Mm-hmm.
And the perception of gains and losses that we kind of associate with that event. Yeah,
and the fact that it like we feel like it can be scary, or the fact that it has the power to trigger maladaptive behavior, but it doesn't have to, and it doesn't. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
I think we're kind of trying to say the same thing. We're just coming at it from different sides.
Yeah.
What do you think? I think they got it right. I don't want to like beat a dead horse or anything, like just hammer it into everybody's heads. But I think it kind of goes back to what we say, which is yes and, right? Life is messy, so it's all about embracing, I made this decision that I'm really satisfied with, and I did have some losses associated with it, or I had this thing happen to me that I really didn't like, and I had some gains from it.
Yeah.
So to embrace both those sides, to embrace the and the messiness of it, and to say like, it's okay to have all the feelings that you have and to have whatever behaviors associated with them that you have.
Yes. I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about other things we'd like to correct?
Well, that was the main one. It's been sticking with me for a little bit. And so I wanted to definitely make sure that we went back and corrected that.
Let's see. I feel like for the most part, we stand by a lot of what we said.
Yeah.
Let me pull it up. While we're doing the redux, let's clear the air.
Okay.
Let's see. It's fine to change your mind.
I mean, here's a thing that I would say. There's no way that we can think about all the things we would like to correct from the podcast that we've done. If people have questions, comments,
let us know.
Let us know. We're more than happy to revisit things. Yeah. We're more than happy to say, hey, this is the way we were looking at it, but here's this other perspective that I think is really great and valid. Or even if I don't agree with it, here's this other perspective.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not about just like forcing our ideas on people. It's just about like presenting them, and I'm more than happy to incorporate other things as I learn them or become aware of them. Yeah. And I'm sure you are too.
Yeah. And for the longest time, and I think this comes from like my academic upbringing, I was really scared to have stances and thoughts on things because a lot of times I'd never really like land on one side, and then I was like, what if people come back to me and they're like, but you said this and then you said this and then it contradicts each other. I'm like, that's fine. So, I mean, if you've heard something, like, I'm sure we contradict ourselves probably 20 times each episode.
Oh, probably.
Probably.
Because life is messy like that.
And that's fantastic. Like, I think the thing is, one thing that, like, if I could shout it from the rooftops, is the way to tell, this is kind of like a standalone tangent, the way to tell if someone knows what they're talking about is if they're unwilling to commit to a side. Because, like, the more you know a subject, the more you're going to find the gray areas and the more you're going to hear it depends. Versus if someone views it as, like, very much a black or white thing, that shows you they don't understand shit.
Well, I think that's true. And I would...
I did that just to lead her into it.
And I would say people can have a stance, but are you or are you not willing to incorporate new information that you learn? Right? Like, I could really think that the best way to show grief is to cry. Like, I could be absolutely think, like, for me, that's correct.
Yeah.
And yet I got all this new information. Do I reject it out of hand? Do I just say, oh, no, that's not the case? Or do I say, let me take that in. And how does it shift my worldview? And how does it change the way I view things? So, yes, what you said. And what I said too.
Exactly. Okay.
We're good.
I feel like that's it for this episode.
I agree.
If you have questions, comments, concerns, tangents, all of the things, let us know. Leave us a review. Leave us a comment or star rating.
Or post it in our group.
Or post it in the group. We are on Facebook. We're the Sugar and Spice Society. Both of us are active in there. And yeah, that's it for this week. Talk to you guys later.
Have a lovely day.
Bye. That wraps up this episode of the Sugar and Spikes podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We'd also like to thank Forget the Whale for use of their song, Move Along, as our theme music. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and let the whole world know how good this shit is by leaving a review. It would mean so, so, so much. Also, don't forget to get your free stress layer training by going to DesireeW.com and clicking on Slay Your Stress. You'll also find a link to that in the show notes below. Till next time, and remember to stay unavailable for fuckery.